Chapter 1. A Request from the Unlikeliest of Worlds. In the heart of the spiral galaxy's dust lanes, where the stars burned with the colors of exotic minerals and the space between them was thick with radio static, there existed a world that most freighter captains skipped on their routes, for it was neither rich in trade nor famous for hospitality. And yet, for Ethan Reese, a wandering human engineer whose knack for repairing the impossible had earned him a place in half a dozen cultures' legends, this world would become the stage for the most bewildering, life-altering week of his existence. A week that would begin as all the best sci-fi epics do, with a desperate message received at the edge of sleep, in the kind of backwater port where the neon signs flickered and the air tasted faintly of burnt ozone and regret. Ethan, with his toolkit and his battered ship affectionately named the Stubborn Dream, had drifted into the orbit of Zytheria on nothing but rumors of rare alloys and the faint hope of a hot meal. He'd expected at best a quick contract, at worst a few hours of haggling, and then another lonely jump to nowhere. But as the dream spun lazily above the turquoise clouds, a high-priority comm burst sliced through the static, encoded in the multi-tone trills of the Zytherian matriarchy, and the AI flagged it as urgent, biological, and highly confidential, leaving Ethan rubbing his temples as he deciphered the message. A summons to the House of the Blooming Sapphire, signed by the hand of Matron Kyra herself, an honor that, according to the local networks, was usually reserved for planetary heroes, heads of state, or mates chosen for the annual fertility cycle. Still half convinced it was a prank, Ethan replied with a curt acknowledgement and descended into the atmosphere, letting the AI handle the details while he washed the grease from his hands, donned his least offensive tunic, and tried to remember if Zytherians considered facial hair an asset or a public hazard. The city of Lysaline unfolded beneath him like a living jewel, its towers sculpted from semi-translucent stone that shimmered with the pulse of hidden bioluminescence, walkways winding through gardens hung with vines that glowed in the alien dusk, and everywhere, the air thick with a perfume that was neither floral nor sweet, but alive, sharp, and dizzying. Ethan was met at the landing platform by two attendants in iridescent sashes, their faces hidden behind masks of swirling crystal, and ushered wordlessly through halls carved in spirals and vaults shaped like the inside of a great shell. The deeper they went, the more obvious it became that the palace was both ancient and a live biotech woven into stone, subtle pulses beneath the floor, vines responding to the touch of the servants' feet, and everywhere, the sense of a million stories echoing in the air. Ethan, ever the pragmatic outsider, kept his hands to himself and his eyes forward, but could not help a prickle of anticipation as he was led at last into a chamber unlike any he'd seen. Walls of living glass, water flowing in thin sheets from ceiling to floor, and, at its heart, for figures whose beauty was not simply visual, but a presence tall, statuesque, skin swirling with the colors of midnight and indigo, eyes luminous and ancient and, in this moment, clouded by a hunger that was not wholly physical. The four Zytherian women waited for him in a ring of cushions and silk, each one a study in both alien grandeur and unmistakable desperation. There was Eris, whose hair cascaded in a tumble of violet and silver and whose laughter, in less troubled times, could be heard from the garden to the kitchens. Lyra, smaller but no less regal, her eyes dark pools that reflected every flicker of light in the chamber. Vale, the scholar, with the subtle markings of 1,000 years' worth of gene ink, swirling down her arms, and finally Selen, whose presence alone seemed to shift the air, commanding and vulnerable in the same breath. The matron herself was absent, leaving the four to rise and greet Ethan with a formality that quickly dissolved into a kind of nervous hope, their words tripping over one another in a musical cadence as they explained their predicament. The Zytherian cycle was upon them, a convergence of biology and culture, when the old genetic scripts flared to life, and those of the matriarchy who had not yet chosen a mate found themselves compelled, mind and body, to seek out the touch of an outsider. This year, a virus subtle, engineered, and utterly unforeseen had swept through the eligible consorts, leaving only Ethan, the human whose arrival was seen as an omen, perhaps even a test of the old legends that spoke of humans as solvers of impossible needs. There was embarrassment, yes, and a pleading undertone that Ethan, despite his initial shock, recognized from a dozen encounters with worlds whose customs he barely grasped. A request not for romance, nor even pleasure, but for help, a biological service that, if refused, would risk not only their dignity, but the social standing and future fertility of the entire house. Ethan, ever the reluctant hero, tried to frame a response that would be both honest and kind, but before he could speak, the heat in the chamber seemed to double, the Zytherian women's pheromones filling the air with a sweetness that was almost electric, setting his nerves alight and clouding the edges of rational thought. He listened as Vale, voice shaking, described the symptoms: the fever, the aches, the gnawing hunger that no food or meditation could assuage, and how, with every hour that passed, the urge intensified, until the pain of it threatened to break the mind as much as the body. Eris clung to his arm, her hand cool and trembling, her laughter now replaced by a desperate whisper. They say your kind can endure, can adapt, can serve more than one at once. Lyra, with tears welling in her eyes, added, it's not shame we fear, but extinction our bloodlines must not fail. Selen, who had yet to speak, simply pressed her forehead to Ethan's and let her body's tremor say what words could not. Thus, with the gravity of the situation made clear, Ethan was given a choice that felt both surreal and weighty: no coercion, no contract, just a roomful of hope and a cultural expectation that to serve was not subjugation, but an act of community, a gift given freely and honored for generations. In the moments that followed, as the doors closed and the outside world melted away into a haze of color and scent, Ethan found himself responding not simply to the women's pleas, but to a deeper current, a resonance between his own lifelong search for meaning and the Zytherians' yearning for connection, for legacy, for the comfort of hands and words and hearts joined in trust. There was ritual to what came next, scented oils anointed on wrists and temples, hands clasped in a circle while ancient blessings were spoken, the language so old that even the AI translator hesitated, its circuits unable to parse the emotion that filled the chamber. The fever that racked the women became a palpable force, a pulse that synchronized with Ethan's own heartbeat, and he discovered, to his astonishment, that the Zytherian heat was more than biological. There was a psychic aspect, a sharing of memories and sensations that flooded his senses with visions of endless gardens, lost cities, lovers long vanished, and the fierce pride of a lineage that had survived countless galactic winters. Hours passed in a blur of touch and sound, the chamber awash in shifting hues as the living glass responded to every cry and sigh, every whispered word and shared breath. Ethan moved from one to the next, sometimes held by two at once, sometimes simply cradling a trembling hand or pressing a cool cloth to a fevered brow. The act of service expanding beyond the physical into something deeper. He became confidant, healer, partner in an ancient dance of need and relief, his presence anchoring the. For as their bodies rode the peaks and valleys of the cycle, Lyra, whose pain had been the worst, was the first to find relief, her sigh of gratitude so heartfelt it left Ethan blinking back his own tears. Eris recovered next, her laughter restored, though gentler now, as she teased the others and pressed cool fruit to Ethan's lips in thanks. Vale, always the last to let go of control, finally surrendered to the comfort offered, her mind reaching for Ethan's in a flood of images so vivid he could taste the rivers of her childhood, the bitterness of exile, the joy of belonging. Selen, the strongest and the most guarded, took the longest, but when her fever broke, it was as if a storm had passed and left the world brighter, her embrace fierce as she whispered, "You have no idea what you have given us." When the ordeal at last subsided, the chamber grew still, the glass walls misted with condensation, the water flowing slower now, gentle as the first rain after a drought. The Zytherian women curled together in a loose embrace, their bodies pressed to Ethan's, their eyes clear for the first time since his arrival. There was exhaustion, yes, but also a serenity that spoke of pain endured and overcome, of trust repaid in the oldest way possible. The AI, its voice now softened by the collective mood, confirmed that the cycle's crisis had passed, that the biological imperatives had been met, and that Ethan's own vital signs, though elevated, were well within human tolerance. The women thanked him not with words, but with gifts, a bracelet woven from living crystal, a seed pod that would one day bloom in any soil, a fragment of song recorded in the palace's memory. Ethan, for his part, found himself changed not just by the intensity of the experience, but by the sense of having been needed, of having mattered in a way that transcended contracts and credits and all the tired games of interstellar commerce. The next day, the matron herself summoned Ethan for a private audience, her gratitude formal but unmistakable, her promise that the House of the Blooming Sapphire would always offer him sanctuary, rare honor that carried weight even beyond Zytheria's borders. She also confessed, with a wry smile, that rumors of his service were already spreading through the city, sparking debate and envy, and that several neighboring houses had inquired as to whether the human might be willing to assist with their own cycles should need arise. Ethan, mortified but unable to suppress a rueful chuckle, replied that he'd consider any invitation carefully, but that he was, above all, glad to have been able to help. The matron's parting words lingered with him as he prepared to return to his ship. Sometimes, Ethan Reese, the most valuable thing in a cold universe is not strength, nor wealth, but the willingness to give comfort where it is most needed, and to accept comfort in return. As Ethan walked the garden paths one last time, the four women joined him now, friends as much as anything, their laughter and conversation easy, their gratitude more than words could express. The world seemed, in that moment, both impossibly vast and intimately small, and Ethan realized that he had found something precious here, not just a story to tell, but a reminder that even in the strangest corners of the galaxy, there were moments when need, courage, and kindness could change the course of fate for more than just oneself. And so, with the scent of Zytherian blooms still lingering in his hair and the memory of desperate hands still pressed to his skin, Ethan boarded the stubborn dream and lifted off into the blue, carrying with him not just gifts and honors, but a sense of purpose he had never expected to find in the desperate plea of four alien girls in heat, and the unbreakable bond that would shape all the days to come. Chapter 2. The Ties That Remain. The days following Ethan's unlikely service to the House of the Blooming Sapphire unfolded with a quiet strangeness that felt almost dreamlike, as if the entire world of Zytheria had subtly shifted in its orbit to accommodate a new gravity, one that tugged at Ethan in ways he could not name. The palace, once a place of awe and faint intimidation, now felt familiar, its living glass corridors and humming bioluminescent vines greeting him with pulses of color that reflected his own moods. Eris, Lyra, Vale, and Selen no longer regarded him as an outsider, nor as a mere consort, but as a confidant and companion. Their interactions shot through with a warmth and comfort that banished any awkwardness left by the intensity of the fever night. They moved as a quartet around him, drifting in and out of his days, pulling him into council sessions with the matron, dragging him into the sun-dappled gardens where he was initiated into alien games of balance and wit, and sometimes simply curling up beside him in the quiet alcoves to swap stories of other worlds, other heartaches, and the shared relief of pain survived. The palace staff, once so distant and inscrutable, now winked or bowed with respect when Ethan passed, and even the city outside seemed to take notice, street vendors offering him odd trinkets, and local children daring each other to ask if he really had four mates, a question that never failed to make the girls laugh and Ethan blush. Yet beneath the surface, Ethan felt the tremors of change rumbling through the house. With the fever cycle broken, the four women could think again beyond immediate need. Their minds turned toward the looming negotiations that would shape not just the future of the Blooming Sapphire, but the fate of Zytheria itself in a galaxy where alliances shifted like desert winds. Vale, always the scholar, spent long hours poring over ancient tablets and new data streams, her rooms filled with the constant low murmur of translation AIs as she traced genetic histories and plotted how Ethan's involvement might ripple through politics and custom. Selen grew more contemplative, her leadership blossoming as she mediated between factions in the matron's court, her authority no longer questioned after the world had witnessed her vulnerability and survival. Eris, released from pain, led the restoration of the palace gardens and hosted gatherings where new songs were composed about the night of deliverance, her laughter infectiously bright. Lyra, quietest but perhaps the deepest changed, began to mentor the next generation of young Zytherians, teaching them about the importance of seeking help, of vulnerability as strength rather than shame, a lesson the fever had branded into her soul. For Ethan, the new role brought its own confusion. Offers poured in from other houses, some polite, some outrageous, all eager to claim the human whose service had now become legend. Dignitaries arrived bearing gifts and veiled invitations. Scientists requested his medical data, hoping to understand the mysterious compatibility that had made his aid possible. Even the planetary governor extended an invitation to a state dinner, the request couched in such diplomatic language that the matron herself laughed aloud, telling Ethan he was now, for better or worse, the most wanted mammal in 1,000 parsecs. Through it all, the four women shielded him, sometimes amused, sometimes protective, always reminding him gently or firmly that he was no one's property, that what had passed in the fever night was born of crisis and trust, not expectation of endless repetition. But as the pressure mounted, Ethan began to feel a new kind of heat, not the biological fever that had nearly undone the women, but the slow, rising warmth of attachment, of belonging. He found himself wondering what it would mean to stay, to root himself in the alien soil of Zytheria, to become more than a wandering problem solver. The girls sensed it. Of course, they always seemed to know his thoughts before he'd voiced them. One evening, as the twin moons painted the palace with blue shadows and the four sat close beside him in the garden's heart, Selen finally spoke what none had dared. If you wished it, you could remain. Not as a legend, not as a cure, but as family. The word hung in the perfumed air, and Ethan realized, with a mixture of awe and terror, that what had started as service had become, for all of them, the seed of something more profound. The choice, at last, was his. Chapter 3. Storm on the Horizon. The calm of newfound connection was, however, not to last. The galaxy, as ever, conspired to remind Ethan and his companions that peace was as fragile as the Zytherian glass that curved above their heads. The rumors began as whispers, strange ships sighted at the system's edge, coded messages intercepted by veiled surveillance nets, and a slow tightening of planetary security that had the city's guards training with live weapons for the first time in years. The fever night had not gone unnoticed beyond Zytheria. Rivals who resented the house of the blooming Sapphire's prestige saw, in Ethan's presence, a threat and a temptation, a wild card that could upset the careful balance of power between matriarchies and merchant guilds. Soon, the palace was abuzz with tension. Emissaries from the rival house of the Crimson Vine arrived under truce, bearing veiled threats and cold smiles. Drones circled overhead with new vigilance, and the matron met with her advisors deep into every night, the lines of worry growing deeper on her regal brow. Amid this mounting unease, Ethan struggled with his role. He was no soldier, no diplomat, yet everywhere he turned, he was greeted as both called upon to represent not only the house, but the promise of cooperation between species, the hope that understanding could overcome suspicion. Eris tried to distract him with laughter and midnight adventures into the city's winding heart. Lyra kept his spirits up with soft songs and stories of other times when Zytheria had faced the storm and survived, but both knew, as did Ethan, that the future was now a battleground not just of desire, but of fate. Selen prepared for war, quietly training a new cadre of guards, while Vale counseled patience, urging negotiation even as the shadow of conflict loomed. The girls leaned on Ethan as much as he leaned on them, their unity becoming both shield and weapon. The threat finally materialized on a night lit by green auroras, when a disguised envoy from the Crimson Vine attempted to abduct Ethan from the palace gardens. The attack was sudden, silent, and almost successful. A dart, a shimmer of shadow, a cold grip at Ethan's throat, but Lyra, sensing danger even in sleep, raised the alarm with a wordless psychic cry that brought the entire palace to arms. Eris and Selen drove the attackers back. Vale coordinated pursuit with chilling efficiency, and Ethan, dazed but alive, realized that what bound him to these four women was now more than accident or crisis. It was mutual protection, loyalty, a chosen kinship that would be tested in the days to come. As dawn broke and the city counted its wounds, the matron called Ethan and the four to her side and declared, before the assembled house, that whatever else the galaxy brought, the human would stand with them not as a trophy or tool, but as a true part of their line. With the palace on alert and the world watching, Ethan and his companions prepared for whatever storms the galaxy had in store, their bond forged in both need and devotion, ready to face the unknown together. The palace was no longer just a sanctuary. It became a fortress, every entrance guarded by silent sentinels, every garden path watched by drone eyes glinting in the filtered sunlight. The events of the attempted abduction had changed everything, not only for Ethan but for the house of the blooming sapphire and the world beyond its living glass walls. Messages poured in from across Cytheria. Some offered support and outrage, pledging fealty to the matron and her chosen kin. Others cold, jealous, or opportunistic demanded that Ethan be surrendered for the good of all, as if one human life could balance the scales of ancient rivalry and fragile alliances. Yet, within the heart of the palace, Ethan found a new kind of strength taking root not just his own, but woven through the very fabric of his life with Eris, Lyra, Vale, and Selen. The days became a cycle of vigilance and preparation. Eris taught Ethan the ways of the palace's subtle defenses, how to sense a shimmer in the garden's light that meant a cloaked intruder, how to call upon the plants themselves to bind an enemy with thorn and vine. Lyra guided him through the mental disciplines of Cytherian empathy, a kind of shared meditation that not only soothed his restless mind, but strengthened the psychic connection between them, so that each could sense the other's moods, fears, and even flashes of danger. Vale spent hours in the archives, consulting with off-world allies, deciphering patterns in the chaos of intercepted transmissions, until she could predict the enemy's next move with uncanny accuracy. Selen, always the anchor, trained with the house guards, her quiet authority growing into a fierce, radiant presence that even rival houses began to respect. Together, the five became more than the sum of their parts, a unit as attuned to each other's strengths as to their own. The differences that once separated human from Cytherian blurred into a tapestry of resilience. Tension reached a peak when word arrived that the Crimson Vine had assembled a coalition of disgruntled houses and mercenary bands. They would march not just on the palace, but on Lissaline itself, intent on forcing the matron to hand over Ethan and thereby shatter the blooming Sapphire's power and pride. For a moment, fear gripped the city, the old dread that all things beautiful and fragile could be broken by brute force, but in the palace, resolve deepened. The matron addressed the assembled house, her voice carrying to every corner through living glass resonance. They seek to divide us by fear and envy, but we are not divided. Our bonds of love, of kinship, of choice are the very strength that will see us through the storm. She looked to Ethan, to Eris, Lyra, Vale, and Selen, and with that gaze made them not only the heart of the house, but the symbol of a future in which unity across difference might mean survival for all. The siege began at dusk, the sky bruised with the lights of dropships and marching lines of armored figures. But as the enemy advanced, they met not panic, but carefully laid defenses, every trap a blend of Cytherian biotechnology and the improvisational genius Ethan had brought from Earth. The palace gardens became labyrinths of illusion and living walls. The corridors rang with the songs of defiance Eris had taught the house, and the enemy, confused and slowed, faltered at every step. In the center of it all, the five Ethan, Eris, Lyra, Vale, and Selen stood united, channeling every lesson learned, every bond forged in the desperate days and nights before. When at last the final push came, and the coalition leaders demanded Ethan be brought out in chains, it was Selen who answered them, flanked by her sisters and the human they all called family. You came to break us, but you have only shown us how strong we are together. The standoff ended not with a battle, but with the slow, sullen retreat of the coalition. Too many of their number had been won over by the house's example, their own ranks splintering under the pressure of a unity they could neither replicate nor destroy. When the dust settled, the house of the blooming sapphire was not only intact, but ascendant, its reputation for compassion, strength, and cross-species kinship growing with every retelling of their defense. Chapter 4. A new cycle, a new forever. The aftermath of the siege brought not only relief, but a flowering of possibility none could have imagined in the desperate, fevered days when Ethan first set foot in Lissaline. The city emerged from fear into a celebration, welcoming not only the preservation of the house, but the dawning understanding that change, once seen as threat, could become hope if met with open hands and hearts. For Ethan, the decision he had once dreaded whether to remain or depart became clear, not from pressure or duty, but from the gentle accumulation of moments. Waking to find Eris tracing stories on his arm as sunlight spilled through the living glass, sharing quiet songs with Lyra in the garden's shadows, their voices blending in harmonies neither had known they could create. Debating the mysteries of history and destiny with Vale late into the night, laughter dissolving into companionable silence, standing side by side with Selen at the city's edge, watching new shoots break through the soil she and Ethan had helped plant, dreaming aloud of what they might build together. The house, too, changed in ways subtle and profound. Young Zytherians grew up not only hearing tales of the human who had come in a time of need, but meeting him, learning from him, playing in gardens where Earth's wildflowers mingled with Zytheria's singing vines. Off-worlders arrived with curiosity and respect, not to claim or conquer, but to ask how unity had been achieved in a world long riven by old feuds. The matron's court became a center for the exchange of not just goods but ideas, healing, and a model for other houses to follow. Where once the question of service had meant only duty, now it meant care, consent, and the weaving of futures together by choice. Ethan, at last at peace, found himself more than a legend. He became a pillar of the community, an advisor and a companion, a link between worlds that had once seemed forever apart. The love that bound him to Eris, Lyra, Vale, and Selen deepened, no longer born from desperation or necessity, but from shared triumph, forgiveness, and joy. The five celebrated each cycle together, not as crisis, but as festival, their story shaping the rights of new generations. When the time came to look back, they did so not with regret, but with wonder at how a plea for help, answered in kindness and faith, had sparked a new way of life for their house and their world. As Zytheria spun on beneath the endless, starlit sky, Ethan and his four beloveds would often stand atop the palace's highest tower, watching the ships drift like fireflies above the city, their arms linked, laughter echoing through the gardens below. And in those moments between past and future, between worlds and hearts, they knew that no storm, no cycle, and no outside threat could ever undo what they had built. A bond fierce enough to outlast any heat, a unity strong enough to turn even the coldest night into forever.